Welcome, everyone, to this installment of Ask an Advocate. This month, we have a very special opportunity. It is October, which means it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And rather than have an expert and a Q&A type of thing that informs people about different aspects and nuances of how to manage a case, this month we're actually going to have a conversation with a survivor who has some sincere and important advice for other survivors. And before we get started, I also want to just alert anyone who is watching that some of this content may be challenging. We are not planning to get graphic in any way or deliberately use triggering descriptions of anything, but the nature of this story is inherently very challenging. So be prepared to hear some very raw truth about a really important experience that a survivor has had that can inform other survivors about what to expect on their own journeys. So with that, I would like to introduce Ashley. Ashley, would you like to say hi to the people?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to say thank you in advance for sharing your time with us and your story with us today. I know that you've been cultivating a lot of courage in preparing to tell this story and looking for the right outlet. And we're honored to hold space for you. Please feel free to take your time, modify how you want to share these things in real time as you see fit. Yeah, we'll try and get some good information for the folks watching. So just to get things set up a bit about the nature of your relationship, can you tell me about how long were you married?
Yes, I was married to my ex-husband for about 10 years, together about 12 and a half.
Okay. And at some point, things started fraying and ultimately went bad. About how long ago was that, or how long into the marriage?
It started going bad very soon. I became pregnant very quickly in that relationship. Felt pressure from family and otherwise that, staying with him and getting married was the right choice. But as soon as I just made that commitment to him are when red flags started showing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And without getting into, any specific details at all, how did that manifest? Painting with a broad brush.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about, so I can name it better now. I didn't know what to term it then. But there was a variety of types of abuse that escalated over those 10 years, especially the last half of that marriage, when I started kind of speaking up about what I was having issues with. But it ranged from physical and sexual rape, if you want to call it. I would say the emotional abuse was by far the hardest thing, both during and also to recover from. Uh, even economic money, preventing me from working by hiding devices or computers, which is how I do my work. And then often involving the children and or threatening to take them away if I ever left him were things that were going on.
It sounds like a broad cross section of control
Mhm.
type behaviors that we're very familiar with at Advocates. And it sounds like you got them all.
Yeah,
Um,
I've been,
yeah,
I see that now. I didn't, realize a lot of that then, but I've been informed about that through advocates that it's a lot of times people have some of those things, which they're all in their own ways intolerable. It's can be unusual to have all of them going on, but apparently they were.
right. You did finally leave him, however.
hmm I did.
And as I understood it, that took a couple of attempts.
It did. I tried on my, I don't want to say on my own as if I didn't have family support, but they're not physically here. Christmas of 2017, my entire family was here, mom and dad and three siblings. Um, and it had gotten much worse since the previous time I'd tried to leave, which was 2016. Um, and my mom and sister stayed to help me figure it out. I met with a lawyer who has been with me since then. in the process becoming increasingly shocked at my ex-husband and what has gone on since. But with the help of advocates, my mom, my sister, and that attorney, I was able to leave, and did that with the help of a restraining order that advocates prepared, and then was served through a law enforcement officer on January
So
4th.
about so January 4th of this past year, or when did you
I'm
find?
sorry, January 4th,
So,
2018. He was served with a civil protection order as well as divorce papers, and so he had to leave the house.
okay. So at the same time as you were leaving, you were able to engage with law enforcement to try and get protective orders in place. Is that
Mm,
correct?
yes. I was told
Um,
I was told then, and I will talk about it later, that be careful, Ashley, it's just a piece of paper. But I felt at the time better knowing that they had issued one against him.
yeah. Yeah, and I believe that a lot of survivors do. It makes a lot of sense. I feel like your story is echoing a lot of what we hear as far as not recognizing red flags very early, or even just not having the vocabulary to identify them that way. And then the escalating and diverse ways of trying to exert control seem very, very common. Um, so you engaged with law enforcement, and how was that experience for you initially when you got the restraining order?
It was good. I felt that they were worried and I had their support, and they were being cautious. I live in one of the smaller Route County towns, and so they, you know, did extra patrols and kept a better watch, knowing what was going on. But he started violating the restraining order very quickly, relatively quickly, after less than 2 weeks, repeatedly. Um, and I ultimately reached out to law enforcement confidentially, and they said they'll give me a one-time pass to speak without reporting. And I told them what was going on, and they said, well, if we can't tell you what to do, but we would report this because it's only going to get worse. So I ultimately did report that, and he was arrested on um, 3 or 4 or 5 violations that happened within a week then. Um, but and then he was released on bond, I think a day or two after that. That was the first time I reported the first violations, which happened over a few days in January of 2018.
Which was right after you'd gotten the restraining order, correct?
Yeah.
So if I'm just to get my timeline clear, you got the restraining order at the beginning of the year. Within a couple of weeks, he was already violating it.
Hmm.
Soon after that, you made a formal report and he was arrested again, but within days was bonded out and released again. Is that true?
Correct. Um, Given the small community, and I guess fortunately in some ways hearing things from people, I after that first arrest on violations, I was hearing increasingly disturbing behavior on his part and concerning on my part, in which my neighbor gave me one of his guns. I didn't have one, in case he ever got us or in the house to us. Um, I was being told by police officers and therapists to remain, quote, extremely vigilant. Um, People were saying they thought he could get to either a low enough or high enough state to take myself and the children before his own life. And as those things were happening, which a lot of them I can't remember in the next 3 weeks, he tried to break into the home on February 7th of 2018 at about 2:15 in the morning. Um, I can speak about what that happened that night or just briefly. I don't know what you'd prefer.
Yeah, please speak freely about that.
Um, Prior to now, which I'll get to later, that was definitely the scariest night of my life. It was, I don't know what day of the week it was, but February 7th, about 2:15 in the morning. I had my 4-year-old son, who at the time would come into my bed in the middle of the night to sleep. My dog started barking, which they never do that in the middle of the night. So I got up, quieted them, and as I laid back down, my neighbor called me. I never heard his voice quite so serious or so grave. And he told me, he said, Ashley, get that gun right now. He, and I won't say his name, is outside of your house, outside of your bedroom door. which is a sliding glass door to the outside. Right now, I've already called the police. Don't go outside. I will try to get him to leave. And he hung up. Ultimately, I called 911 because I didn't know if he truly had called the police or what was going on. They made me stay on the phone call for what seemed like forever. Ultimately, though, my neighbor got him to leave, and then he proceeded to take the police on a high-speed chase over 100 miles an hour through the canyon, headed back to Steamboat, where he ultimately, I think, somehow went into a snowbank or something, but was apprehended. That, I believe, was an early Wednesday morning. I was told the next day, if he gets out on bond, that you guys need to leave. You're not safe, as in leave the area. I also had an alarm system. I just happened to have a friend of the family whose friend of his installs alarm systems.
I may pause you right there just so we can avoid safety plan stuff, or alert anyone to some of the precautions that you've taken.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
Ultimately, he bonded out on that, and we went to Michigan the next day, and very few people knew where we were for those 3 weeks.
Can I ask you a quick question? So
Mhm.
from the time that he attempted to break into your home, led them on the high-speed chase and was arrested, how much time did he spend in jail before he was bonded out?
2 nights.
2 nights.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's typical or not, but that doesn't seem like it really enhances your safety to release him that quickly.
No, it does not at all.
And you ultimately ended up leaving town and relocating, or
Not
temporarily?
permanently. We came back the day I found out he was going to go to a treatment program. We came back the day he left for that, and that was in California.
Got it.
Upon return from that program, 30 days later, he crashed his car. People said he would have died if he hadn't been drinking, in what was believed to be another attempt to come out to our house, because there was a phone call on his phone to my number, although it never rang through on my end.
And that wasn't the end of this saga either, was it?
No, and he didn't go to jail for that because he had broken his neck and was in the hospital for quite some time.
And the time that he was in the hospital, they applied towards his sentence?
Oh,
Or why wasn't that applied to him later?
I don't know.
Okay. So he finishes treatment. He wrecks his car and ends up in the hospital.
Mhm.
Um, and at this point, you're back in your hometown?
I am, yeah. Um,
Uh, yeah.
back in my yes, back at home, working on keeping ourselves safe. I consider my neighbor one of the best people in the world. He always watches out for us too, or tries to. Um, Soon after the hospital, he claimed to be too physically incapable of working on things for the divorce that, of course, I desperately wanted, let alone other things. Things of the divorce and criminal stuff on his side were delayed for what would be years. Between him changing lawyers, I mean, it's got to be a dozen that he went through, many of whom fired him, if not all of them. He repeatedly violated the restraining orders in a variety of ways, including stalking over the next couple of years, would always be arrested and then bond out within a day, maybe two. In May of 2018, the undersheriff advised me to get a concealed carry permit, which he trained me in and issued me an emergency permit. And I've carried, and so that was meaningful to me in the sense of I'd never been told to do that in my life. But the fact that I had to do that in an effort to keep us safe was kind of surprising to me. Mhm.
Yeah, that does seem like a rare recommendation, much less an action that is typically taken to expedite access to firearms.
Mhm.
Um, do you have a sense of how many times he violated the order, how many times he was arrested and then bonded out,
Mm,
roughly?
Yes, roughly. I don't want to be like quoted on this, but it's that have been proven, I'll say, because there's other things that have happened that are difficult to prove. About 8 times, I believe,
8 times.
possibly 7. I'm trying to question one thing.
Well, I mean, one violation of a protection order, it should be enough to take extra steps to make sure that it's being respected, whether that means jail time or some other punitive measure. It sounds like none of that happened for this to happen recurringly.
Right, and then to speak to, I don't know what things are like in other areas. Other than that, one of my clients, who is an attorney in Michigan, um, I reached out to him for advice on kind of the things that have happened, and he said, I mean, he's a family and a criminal lawyer, and he said, I'm speechless. This would never ever ever have happened in Michigan. So I'm not. I mean, I don't know the reasons for that, but again, that's why initially, kind of the premise is why I'm starting to speak out, hopefully for the benefit of others too, is to hopefully bring change to a system that at least here is not really helping victims.
Yeah, it sounds like they haven't done enough to keep you safe, at least.
No.
So I know that one of the things that you really wanted to underline for other survivors was how to relate to a restraining order and what it's actually capable of doing for keeping you safe. Would you like a moment to speak about that? Just your experience of initially having it and feeling like, yes, this is fantastic, and what it is now in your mind.
Yeah, it's nothing. I mean, really nothing.
Yeah, it definitely without being enforced, it seems like more of a suggestion than a boundary that is being imposed on someone.
Right.
Um, you did say that you had good experiences, solid experiences with law enforcement at the police level, that they were very
I did.
supportive. That Go
I
ahead.
really, definitely that first year, year and a half, I really truly felt they were, you know, worried about me, frustrated with the whole situation. Didn't fully understand why he was being allowed to bond out repeatedly. My biggest confusion when I say the justice system is not law enforcement, it's more judges who allow a person who's repeatedly committing the same or similar crimes against the same person to bond out over and over to just commit those crimes again, combined with what I've not spoken to yet, which would be CAPS programs and probation.
Right. Yeah, I think let's address all of those. I think so. The judge ultimately has the option whether or not to offer bond, as I understand it. And the judge in this case consistently kept offering it over and over again,
Even,
despite having violated the orders.
yeah, and the last time or two during that first year, the DA said they wrote a very strong bond memo requesting no bond option be offered whatsoever. But um, again, he was given a very easy PR bond each time.
And PR being personal recognizance for anyone who's listening. Um, and the judge ultimately went against the recommendation of the DA.
Mhm. Which, if it matters, was a different district at that time, the DA's office, due to a client I was working with at the time. It didn't get transferred back to our current DA until, I believe, June-ish of 2019.
Right. But it wasn't the DA's choice in the first place. It was ultimately the judge's.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. As I understand it, there are also issues with, you mentioned CAPS. Can you outline what CAPS is and what the acronym stands for?
Yeah, community, actually, I don't actually know what the A is, but community corrections is what it's usually called.
Mhm.
Um, Knowing what I know about it now, it's kind of like they use it in lieu of prison. But from what I've learned about it, even people in there, it seems like a very laid back, I mean, close people to me call it kind of like a vacation, where inmates can very quickly be allowed to leave for fun and or work. I mean, it's definitely not even the same thing as the Routt County Jail. It's much different. At the sentencing hearing, which finally happened October of 2019, that judge was a different judge than the one who bonds people out. It was a felony judge. He did say to my ex-husband that he deserved prison and should feel lucky to be getting this plea agreement. And he was sentenced to 3 years in community corrections in Craig, with 2 felony charges and 5 misdemeanors, including, of course, crimes of domestic violence. So I assumed that he would be away for 3 years, but very soon, even after that sentencing, heard from people that he was out, for example, bowling in Craig within a month after being sentenced, which seemed very odd, especially given I was told, I believe by the DA, or at least his understanding, was that he would not be allowed to even earn passes for at least a year, as in to leave the facility. He did harass a few of my friends while he was in that facility. I have done PTSD therapy. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, which is a different kind of PTSD, a couple years ago. And she's told me throughout the process that I'm here to, help you work through it. But me, can't fully work on recovering from the trauma and the effects of the PTSD until you physically and mentally feel safe, which will not happen until he leaves you alone. And anytime he's been free to do what he wants, he does not leave me alone.
Right. Yeah. So CAPS, as I just got some insight, is the Correctional Alternative Placement Services. And just the little bit that I've learned about it, it's less than minimum security. It's residential, but with a lot of mobility, just like you were describing it. But they also, because it is a correctional facility and is state run, they were supposed to inform you when he was getting out. Isn't that correct?
I've been told, required by law to both consult with the victim before the release on their thoughts, and then also regardless notify them when they are released. And I would say most particularly in a case which happened to me in March of this year, 2020, so about 5 months of his 3-year sentence, he was released early, but I was not notified. I found out this was during kind of the quarantine when we first shut down. My kids had a FaceTime or something on the computer with his parents, their grandparents, and their father was on that FaceTime call. And I kind of was very confused, not to mention scared. But thought maybe he has some past. I don't know. And it's just a one-time thing. But the next night they had a call and he was there again. So I reached out to my attorney, and I believe the DA, and I also believe one of the sheriffs who's a friend. And within about a day, they found out what had happened, and they didn't really fully understand it, but he was released and converted to serve the rest of his 3-year sentence under the supervision of Routt County Probation.
And I remember from our conversations that probation also had a significant role and a significant oversight in alerting you as well to what his status as far as being incarcerated or being released. Aren't they supposed to notify you too?
I would think, and I was told this, I was told this by probation. I don't know the accuracy of it recently. And this came up. Do you want me to go into that now? I didn't find out what they said until after his second.
However you want to share it.
Well, maybe I'll just tell kind of the timeline of this year. So he was early released in March. Soon, kind of the behaviors that had happened before he went away to CAPS started again, but in my mind, almost worse. He started using my kids because he was now allowed to have talking time with them. They began saying things that were things they'd never ever said before. I would say he was manipulating them, which went on for about 2 months. Behaviors, especially my 2 oldest daughters, became very concerning, and I didn't know where it was coming from. The stalking behaviors started again, and in my view, harassing me also through law enforcement and human services. And some of the behaviors that happened were sent to his probation officer, but nothing came of that. I got a call August 31st, again, 2020 this year, from the DA who said in an hour he has a resentencing, and you should be on that. It was a virtual sentencing based on some things that because he didn't serve his full years, and one of the other sentencing with a different charge was a concurrent time he needed to serve in jail, Routt County Jail, that he would be, saying this still needs to be served. And his view to me at that time was he would be going away after that resentencing for 18 months. Instead of that happening, the judge reset the resentencing for September 22nd. After having some evaluations done, and I was advised to leave because I'd already been alerted that he was in a not good state, and combined with him being, what I guess you'd say is blindsided by this new resentencing, I didn't feel safe being there. So we left for, I think, a week and a half then. Came back, was very, more cautious than I have always been with doors and keeping us safe in the house. I found out, I think it was September 17th, that he has been attempting to find somebody to kill me. That's currently under investigation as we speak.
I might push pause on that conversation as well, just to make sure we don't have any media that would influence that case if it's open.
Okay. The resentencing happened September 22nd, where he was sentenced to 7 months in caps in Rifle because apparently the caps in Craig, where he had been, had closed. And then should I not speak about that at all?
I think it's probably, if there's an open case around that, anything related to the open case that you're aware of is probably worth avoiding for our conversation today.
Went away to caps for 7 months. It's unclear why caps and not jail, which was the other sentence that he was serving. I called that facility when he got there, making clear to them that I, would really request to be notified whether he's released on passes or whatever reason. A, due to the safety concerns, but B, I was nervous. I hadn't been notified the last time. I called twice with one of the supervisors. Once they said to call his actual, I think it's called case manager. He said I would have to talk to my ex to see if he's okay with him letting me know. I said, no, don't talk to him about that. That's not going to. And I said, as the victim, I need to be notified. He said he'd get back to me. He never did. But before that even really came to fruition, I again found out through, I guess you'd call happenstance, that he had been released after not even 3 weeks of this other 7 months sentence. And after some more concerning knowledge that I learned the last month about him, I currently, and have been in these entire 3 years, more scared now than I ever have been. And it's really come to the point where this all could have been stopped a lot sooner if all of the violations that he has done would have been held to the consequence that was needed or required by law.
Yeah, absolutely. Were you given any rationale for why he was released from his 7-month jail term?
No.
Nothing?
There's rumors
Go
about COVID, but I've been told he tested negative for COVID. There's rumors that the facility had an outbreak, and I looked that up, and it said no one was being released or transferred. And that it was just me looking it up online. So I really don't know to this. He's been out now, I think 2 or 3 weeks again.
Yeah, every time I get next to this story, I'm completely just shell shocked, and I can't imagine your experience. I do want to just take a moment and applaud your resilience for seeing it through to this point. Um, it's remarkable that you are not only just keeping your head above water, but your willingness to share this story to help other people is something really special. And I just wanted to take this moment to convey that to you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. One of the other things I feel like you've really already touched on it is that the current justice system hasn't been able to restore any sense of safety or security
No.
in any fashion, really. The best advice that you've gotten to keep yourself safe is leave town.
Yeah.
And get a gun. Yeah.
Um,
Survivors should not ever have to face what you've been facing. So just to, it's going to take me a minute to absorb the story again because it's a lot, but there have been certain things that we've talked about briefly that have been useful, at least. Granted, nothing's restored your sense of safety yet, but there are certain steps that have been taken that have been useful for trying to improve your position or understand it better. Could you speak to any of the things that have been valuable on this journey?
yeah, I made a list, and I would actually, if it's okay, we'll just read through them as far as that
Of
goes.
course. Yeah.
I guess just things that I've learned that if they don't always help others, might at least prepare them for what they may or could go through when they leave their abuser. I would say one, take to heart and really think. I would encourage you, yes, to reach out to advocates before you leave. And I'm sure they'll talk about safety planning and listen to them. I won't say that I didn't not listen to them early on before I left. I just didn't fully understand, some of the bigger things they're saying would be good to prepare. Do I really have to do that? But I would just say, yes, listen to advocates, whatever they tell you to do as far as safety planning. And also include, if you have children, them in that planning as well, and what you'll do with them. Knowing where you'll go, all of those things. Too, it is known to be one of the most dangerous times when you leave an abuser. So take whatever precautions you can to keep yourself and/or your children safe. And a lot of the safety planning that you may have to go through is really truly uncomfortable. They might even talk about scenarios you have to walk through if your abuser gets to you and what you have to do. And those aren't things anyone really wants to think about, but it's important so you're not panicking if and when that happens.
Yeah, safety planning, just to give a broad brush for anyone who's witnessing this, is really trying to make a candid assessment of different threats that a survivor may face, and then steps that can be taken to mitigate those threats and ultimately find your way to safety. As Ashley is saying, some of the scenarios that we have to think through and talk through are dark. They are very uncomfortable. They're also real. And I'm glad that you found some value in walking through those, and despite the discomfort that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that you found valuable or useful on this journey?
Just stop me if you want. I have a couple points. So number 2 would be continuing to work with advocates, just things that were helpful to me, even just on an understanding level. They explain what's called the power and control wheel, which we talked about a bit or touched on earlier, and how it plays into domestic violence. And it just describes how abusers use various different ways to try and control victims. Third point would be I say this kind of with a smirk because it's very hard to do, and I didn't do a very good job of it for a while, but if you have the knowledge ahead of time, it's going to be a very stressful, fearful time, to try and take ways to take care of you, from trying to make yourself eat when you don't want to, which is a huge struggle that I still have. When the big fears happen, being conscious of that, starting therapy early, to learn ways to cope with that, and not wanting to, for example, turn to substances because you can't figure out how to handle those feelings, which are hugely difficult, especially the fear. So I would say relying on advocates, therapists, and definitely having if you're able, some sort of support system, friends and or family who you can talk to and that you trust, in place when you know, make this big decision and going forward through it. I mean, I say this, maybe it may sound a bit cheesy, but the close friends in my life have, I think, truly saved me because they've been amazing through all of it.
I wouldn't say that's cheesy at all. I would say that's about as sincere and heartfelt as it gets.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I should add my kids to that because they're one of the biggest things, the biggest thing that drives me.
Yeah. It also speaks to something that Advocates is really trying to amplify. It's that these issues are not, it cannot be managed or handled by individuals. All of this is a community effort. Everything that we can do to keep each other safer is at the community level. It's one of these things where even law enforcement, we rely on them for safety, but the fact is they're primarily responsive. They don't have a whole lot to do with prevention of violence and things like that.
No.
So really, I just wanted to underscore that the value that you find from community and being supportive is the same type of community engagement that we feel at Advocates is necessary for our entire community to start looking out for each other and keeping each other safer. Yeah, my last question for you would just be, in a perfect world, what would you like to see happen from here?
I can say one thing. I want freedom from him, for him to leave me alone. And I don't want to have the feeling that I've been having recently, and that is, unless he finally, quote, gets to me, that it never will happen. Which sadly is something that I've been told by law enforcement that in this county, it often, I mean, I said, does it take me being dead for it to matter? And they said, pretty much.
That's not an acceptable answer.
And they were saying it out of frustration, nothing on their part. But they said Routt County's been called one of the worst counties for victims.
I'm really glad that you had some solid support at the law enforcement level. And I imagine anyone who witnesses this will also feel great alarm at the seemingly nonchalant approach to holding someone accountable who is a violent criminal. I'm so sorry that this has been your experience, and nobody deserves to be treated this way. And your story, I think, is vitally important for other survivors, because even though this is one of the most challenging and worst stories I've ever heard personally, there are variations on it for every survivor. And I think that the solidarity that you're showing by publicly sharing your story will help somebody else not feel as isolated, that this is only happening to them, or that they must have done something wrong because the system isn't working for them, when really that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Is there any sort of last thoughts that you wanted to share?
No, but just to, I guess, even further on what you just brought up, I think, again, and I believe I touched on this in the beginning, was I'm motivated or hopeful in starting to share my story with others, that it might possibly encourage them to speak as well. And if enough awareness is raised, maybe it could prompt change that I think is very much needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no one more qualified to tell this story than you. So thank you again so much for your willingness and your courage in sharing this. I will personally do everything that I can to make sure this story is shared far and wide to serve as many other survivors out there as possible. because this is an incredibly valuable narrative. If you ever want to share more, we can always hop back on this format. And if there's any other way that advocates can offer you support on your journey towards safety, please don't hesitate to let us know. I know that we're in pretty constant contact with you anyway, but I know that our whole team is prepared to go the extra mile to see what we can do for you. So
I really
hope
appreciate it. Thank you.
I hope it's useful. And again, just sincere gratitude. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Have a good evening, and I'll speak with you soon.
You too. Thank you.
Cheers. This concludes our Ask an Advocate for October, Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Yeah, I hope everyone who witnesses this really takes some things to heart about the experience that survivors are having engaging with the justice system. It's not everyone's experience, but it's common enough that this story is incredibly relevant to a broad cross-section of the people that we serve.